Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, we will explore old and powerful wisdom, hidden insights that Buddhist teachers have used for ages to calm the mind and find truly deep rest. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I will be sharing a special selection of powerful Zen stories that show the way to deep calm, mental freedom, and emotional peace. Each story holds an important teaching that can change your relationship to uncertainty, stress, non-stop thinking, and the restless mind. These are not just bedtime stories. They are carefully kept lessons from wise teachers who knew something many of us have forgotten, that peace comes not from changing what's around us, but by changing how we see it. The great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us, the past is already gone. The future is not yet here. There's only one moment for you to live, and that is the present moment. As we listen to these wonderful tales, you might notice something powerful starting to happen. The tight feeling of worry will begin to ease. The constant noise of your thoughts will start to get quieter. You'll find yourself naturally moving into a state of deep understanding and calm. So, settle in deeply now. Let your body relax into whatever supports you. Take one calm breath with me, and as you breathe out, know that you are about to hear teachings that have been waiting for you for a very long time. Our first story takes us to the humble dwelling of a beloved Zen master, where nature itself becomes the teacher. This is Ryokan and the bamboo shoot. In the gentle foothills of Mount Kugami, the Zen master Ryokan lived in profound simplicity. His small, thatched hut, no larger than a single room, sat nestled among ancient pines and flowering cherry trees. For decades, he had chosen this life of voluntary poverty, finding immense wealth in the changing seasons, the songs of birds, and the quiet wisdom that emerges in solitude. His days flowed like water, unhurried and natural, filled with meditation, poetry, and long walks through the mountain forests. Ryokan treasured every aspect of the natural world around him. He would sit for hours watching clouds drift across the sky, seeing in their formations the impermanent nature of all phenomena. He delighted in the morning chorus of birds, finding in their songs a dharma, teaching more profound than any scripture. To him, every leaf that fell, every stream that bubbled, every insect that crawled was a manifestation of Buddha nature itself. One spring morning, as the mountain air filled with the sweet fragrance of cherry blossoms, Ryokan noticed something extraordinary. A tender green bamboo shoot had begun to emerge through the wooden floor of his hut, right in the center of the small room. Day by day, he watched it grow taller, its pale green stalk reaching upward with remarkable determination and grace. The shoot seemed to pulse with life, embodying the very essence of spring's irrepressible energy. A few weeks later, a concerned visitor arrived at Ryokan's hut. This man, a merchant from the nearby village, had come seeking the master's counsel on a business matter. But when he entered the hut and saw the bamboo shoot, now nearly knee-high and growing stronger by the day, he was alarmed. "Master Ryokan," the visitor said with genuine worry, "you must cut down this bamboo shoot immediately and repair your floor before it grows any larger. If you allow it to continue, it will completely destroy your hut. The roots will spread, the floor will buckle, and soon you'll have no shelter at all. Surely you can see the damage it's already causing." Ryokan looked up from his meditation cushion, where he had been sitting quietly beside the growing bamboo, occasionally reaching out to touch its smooth surface with gentle reverence. His eyes sparkled with a joy that seemed almost childlike, and a soft smile spread across his weathered face. "No," he said, with the gentleness of falling snow, shaking his head slowly. "To have the privilege of witnessing a bamboo shoot grow right here beside me, to share my humble space with such a beautiful expression of life's force, I would rather move the hut than disturb this miracle." The merchant stared at the old master in disbelief. "But your home, your possessions, the practical concerns." Ryokan chuckled softly, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "What is a hut compared to this teaching? This bamboo grows not by my permission, but by the same force that moves the stars and changes the seasons. Who am I to interfere with such perfect naturalness?" For the remainder of the growing season, Ryokan continued his daily routines around the expanding bamboo. He cooked his simple meals on one side of the shoot, slept on the other, and meditated facing it as if it were an altar. He would sometimes gently pat its stalk in the morning, greeting it like an old friend, and in the evening, he would sit beside it listening to the subtle sounds it made as it continued to grow. When winter approached and the time came for him to find new shelter, Ryokan quietly gathered his few belongings and left, offering the hut entirely to the bamboo as a silent gift to the way of nature. The Buddha once said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with anger, hatred, or negative thoughts." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound truth about acceptance and the art of yielding to life's natural unfolding. Ryokan's response to the bamboo shoot reveals the difference between fighting reality and dancing with it, between seeing obstacles and recognizing opportunities for deeper understanding. Why do we struggle so intensely against the unexpected changes that grow up through the flaws of our carefully constructed lives? Zen Buddhism points to our fundamental attachment to control and our illusion of ownership. We believe we can and should manage every aspect of our experience, that our plans and preferences should take precedence over the larger intelligence of existence itself. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter your own version of Ryokan's bamboo shoot. Perhaps it's an unexpected delay that disrupts your schedule, a conversation that takes longer than planned, or a change in circumstances that requires you to adapt. Our conditioned response is often similar to the merchant's advice: cut it down, fix the problem, get back to normal as quickly as possible. But what if, like Ryokan, we could see these disruptions not as inconveniences to be eliminated, but as teachings to be received? What if the very things that seem to threaten our carefully ordered lives are actually invitations to discover a more flexible, more responsive way of being? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called sacred accommodation. This doesn't mean passive resignation or failing to take appropriate action when needed. Rather, it means developing the wisdom to recognize when life is presenting us with something more valuable than our original plans. It means learning to distinguish between the ego's desire for control and the deeper intelligence that sometimes rearranges our circumstances for our own growth. The bamboo shoot in Ryokan's hut represents all the unexpected elements that emerge in our lives. The child who needs attention when we're trying to work, the illness that forces us to slow down, the relationship change that requires us to reevaluate our priorities, the career shift that opens unexpected doors. These intrusions often carry gifts we couldn't have planned or purchased. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi spoke of this when he said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Ryokan maintained a beginner's mind, open to the possibility that a bamboo shoot growing through his floor might be more valuable than an intact hut. He chose wonder over worry, curiosity over control. This ancient wisdom challenges our modern obsession with optimization and efficiency. We are trained to see any deviation from our plans as a problem to be solved, any unexpected element as an obstacle to be removed. But Ryokan's example suggests that some of life's greatest teachings come not from what we plan, but from what plans us. The Buddha taught, "Nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming." When we truly understand impermanence, we begin to hold our structures, both physical and mental, more lightly. We recognize that the hut of our current identity, circumstances, or understanding is meant to be a temporary shelter, not a permanent fortress. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life where unexpected changes are growing up through your carefully laid plans, can you find even a small space for Ryokan's perspective? Rather than immediately reaching for the tools of resistance, might you pause and ask what this bamboo shoot has come to teach you? As the Buddha taught, the wise find pleasure in the truth and live in peace. Sometimes the truth that brings the deepest peace is the recognition that we are not the architects of existence, but grateful participants in its unfolding mystery. Let us now turn to a tale of daily practice and the profound wisdom hidden in simple tasks. Our next story reveals the true nature of purposeful action through the old monk and his weeds. In the serene courtyard of an ancient mountain monastery, where centuries of devoted practice had worn smooth paths between carefully tended gardens, lived an old Zen master whose presence seemed to embody the very essence of patient wisdom. Well into his 80s, his back curved like a willow branch shaped by decades of wind, he could be found every morning at dawn, slowly making his way to the monastery's vegetable garden with a small wicker basket in his weathered hands. The garden itself was a testament to mindful cultivation. Neat rows of vegetables grew in rich, dark soil, bordered by stone pathways that had been laid by monks generations before. Morning glory vines climbed wooden trellises, their purple blossoms opening to greet the sun. The sound of a small bamboo fountain provided a gentle rhythm to the work, and the air carried the earthy fragrance of growing things. Each day, without fail, the old master would begin his careful work of weeding. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, each gesture containing a quality of meditation that transformed the simple task into a form of walking prayer. He would kneel slowly beside each plant, his gnarled fingers gently loosening the soil around unwanted growth, carefully lifting each weed with its roots intact before placing it mindfully in his basket. One bright morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the bamboo grove surrounding the garden, a young novice monk approached the master. This novice, recently arrived at the monastery, was filled with the earnest energy of youth and an eagerness to prove his dedication to the Dharma. He had been watching the old master's daily routine with growing concern, his mind calculating the inefficiency of such slow, laborious work. "Venerable master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully but with barely contained enthusiasm, "please allow me to take over this task for you. I am young and strong, my back doesn't ache, and my hands are quick." I could clear this entire garden of weeds in a single morning. You could rest comfortably in the shade, and you wouldn't need to work in the garden again for weeks, perhaps even a month. The old master paused in his work, a small weed still held gently between his thumb and forefinger. He looked up at the eager young face before him, seeing in the novice's earnest expression the same desire for accomplishment that had once burned in his own heart decades ago. His eyes, bright with kindness and touched with the subtle humor that comes from years of practice, held the young monk's gaze for a long moment. "And what?" the master asked quietly, his voice carrying the gentleness of morning mist. "Would I do tomorrow?" The question hung in the air between them like the sound of a temple bell, its simplicity containing depths the young monk had not anticipated. The novice opened his mouth to respond, perhaps to suggest other tasks the master could undertake, other ways to be useful and productive. But something in the old man's patient silence invited deeper consideration. The master then placed the small weed carefully in his basket, as if it were a precious offering, and slowly bent down to examine the next plant. His movements contained no hurry, no sense that this task was something to be completed and moved beyond. Instead, each gesture seemed to contain its own completeness, its own inherent value. The young monk found himself standing there for a long while, watching the master's slow, deliberate movements. He observed how the old man's attention never wavered from the immediate task, how his hands moved with practiced sensitivity, how he seemed to commune with each plant as if greeting an old friend. Gradually, something began to shift in the novice's understanding. He began to see that the purpose of weeding the garden was not simply to have a garden without weeds. The old master was not working towards some future state of completion, but was fully present in the process itself. The weeding was not a means to an end, but a form of meditation, a way of being present with life as it is, moment by moment. Standing in the morning sunlight, watching the ancient rhythm of tend and care, the young monk suddenly understood that he had been asking the wrong question entirely. He had been focused on efficiency and completion, while the master was demonstrating something far more profound: the art of being fully present in whatever task life presents, finding in each moment's work its own perfect completeness. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, what we plant in the soil of contemplation, we shall reap in the harvest of action. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between doing and being, between task completion and mindful presence. The old master's question reveals a profound truth about the nature of spiritual practice and the art of living with purpose. What emerges from this story is the recognition that our modern world has trained us to see most activities as obstacles to overcome, rather than opportunities to practice presence. We rush through necessary tasks, viewing them as interruptions to our real life, always seeking the moment when we can finally relax, finally be present, finally begin living fully. Why do we struggle with this seemingly simple concept of finding meaning in daily tasks? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned relationship with productivity and achievement. We've been taught that value comes from completion, from getting things done, from moving efficiently toward future goals. This mindset transforms the present moment into a stepping stone rather than a destination in itself. Consider your own relationship with routine tasks. How often do you rush through washing dishes, thinking about what you'll do when they're clean? How frequently do you hurry through your morning routine, eager to get to the important parts of your day? The old master's approach suggests that the dishes themselves, the morning routine itself, The weeding itself can become gateways to presence and peace. In Zen practice, we speak of shikantaza, which translates roughly as just sitting. But this principle extends far beyond formal meditation. It points to the possibility of just washing, just walking, just weeding, with complete attention and acceptance. When we bring this quality of presence to any activity, the activity itself becomes a form of meditation. The Buddha taught, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion." The old master understood this deeply. By fully inhabiting each moment of weeding, he transformed what others might see as tedious labor into spiritual practice. He wasn't weeding in order to have a perfect garden. He was weeding as a way of being perfectly present. This teaching challenges our assumption that efficiency equals wisdom. The young monk's offer to clear the garden quickly came from a place of genuine care, but it missed the deeper point. The master didn't need the garden to be weed-free forever. He needed the daily opportunity to practice presence, patience, and gentle attention. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Washing dishes is not only a way to have clean dishes, washing dishes is also a way to live." This captures the essence of the old master's approach. Every mundane task becomes an opportunity to practice mindfulness, to return to the present moment, to find the sacred within the ordinary. The story also reveals something beautiful about sustainability in spiritual practice. The young monk's approach was intense, but unsustainable. A burst of activity followed by weeks of waiting. The master's approach was gentle, but consistent, a daily return to presence that could continue indefinitely. Which approach do you think leads to deeper transformation? Tonight, as you consider the routine tasks in your own life, can you find even one activity to approach with the old master's quality of attention? Perhaps it's preparing your morning tea, folding laundry, or organizing your workspace. What would it feel like to do this task not to get it done, but to be fully present while doing it? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The old master's daily weeding was his one word, spoken again and again through gentle action, bringing peace to himself and teaching patience to all who observed his practice. Our next story leads us to a quiet pavilion where silence becomes the greatest teacher. Let us explore a Zen story about the sound of the rain. In the heart of an ancient temple complex, where weathered stone paths wound between meditation halls and flowering gardens, lived a silent abbess whose very presence seemed to embody the deep stillness that practitioners spent years seeking to cultivate. Her temple, built centuries ago, had sheltered countless seekers, and its worn wooden floors and incense-darkened beams held the accumulated peace of generations of devoted practice. Among the temple's current residents was a young student who had arrived several months earlier with sincere dedication and burning determination. Day after day, he sat on his meditation cushion with fierce concentration, his jaw clenched, his breathing forced, his entire being straining toward the enlightenment he believed lay just beyond his mental chatter. But instead of finding the profound silence his teachers spoke of, his mind seemed to grow more agitated with each passing week. The thoughts came in relentless waves. Fragments of conversations replayed endlessly. Worries about his progress consumed his attention. Doubts about his abilities tormented him during long sits. Self-criticism arose like storm clouds, darkening his inner landscape. The harder he tried to force stillness, the more turbulent his mind became. like trying to smooth water by pressing down on its surface. One evening, as the last light of day faded behind the temple's curved roof lines, the student approached the abbess with desperation evident in his voice and posture. She was sitting in the temple's library, her presence so still she seemed to merge with the gathering dusk, a living embodiment of the peace he desperately sought. "Revered teacher," he said, bowing deeply, his voice tight with frustration, "I confess that I cannot do what you and the other masters speak of. For months, I have tried to quiet my mind, to find the silence you describe, but the thoughts will not stop. They buzz and swirl like angry wasps, and I cannot make them be still. I try to focus on my breath, but within moments, I am lost in thinking. I try to find the silence beneath my thoughts, but there is only more noise, more mental chatter, more inner turmoil. How can I find the peace you speak of when my mind refuses to cooperate?" The abbess regarded him with eyes that held no judgment, only deep compassion for his struggle. She had seen this same earnest striving in countless students over the decades, this desperate grasping for stillness that actually creates more agitation. Without speaking a word, she rose gracefully and gestured for him to follow her. She led him through the temple's corridors, past meditation halls where other practitioners sat in quiet concentration, past altars where butter lamps flickered like stars, until they reached a small, open-air pavilion that overlooked the temple's garden. The pavilion was simple, with only a few cushions arranged on tatami mats, its roof supported by elegant wooden pillars that framed views of ancient pine trees and carefully raked gravel patterns. As they settled onto the cushions, the first drops of rain began to fall. What started as a light sprinkling soon became a steady, gentle shower. The sound began as individual drops striking the pavilion's curved tile roof, each one creating its own small note in an emerging symphony. Soon, the individual sounds merged into a continuous rhythmic patter that seemed to fill the entire world. For nearly an hour, they sat together in complete silence. The student's mind, at first, raced with its familiar patterns. Why are we sitting here? What is the purpose of this? What should I be learning? When will we return to formal practice? But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the persistent, gentle sound of the rain began to penetrate his awareness. The rain fell with such consistency, such natural rhythm, that it began to act like a river, carrying away his thoughts. There was something about its sound that was both soothing and alive, both simple and infinitely complex. He found himself drawn into the texture of it, the different tones as drops struck leaves versus stones, the way the sound changed when the wind shifted the rain's direction, the subtle percussion as water gathered and fell from the pavilion's eaves. His frantic thoughts, which had seemed so urgent and important just minutes before, began to feel small and distant compared to the vast, simple reality of the falling rain. They were still present, but they no longer held his complete attention. They became like whispers in the background of a great natural symphony, noticeable but not compelling, present but not dominating. As the rain continued, his body began to relax in ways he hadn't experienced in months of formal practice. His breathing deepened and slowed naturally, without any effort on his part. His shoulders dropped, releasing tension he didn't even know he was carrying. A profound sense of peace began to fill him, not as something he had achieved or created, but as something he had discovered was already there. waiting beneath his mental activity. When the rain finally began to subside, transitioning from steady shower to occasional drops, the silence that followed felt alive and complete. The abbess turned to him with a gentle smile and spoke her first words of the evening. "Did you hear it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The student paused, thinking she was asking about the silence that had emerged in his mind. "The silence?" he asked hopefully. "No," she replied with infinite gentleness. "The rain." As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. This tale unveils a profound teaching about the nature of awareness and our relationship with the sounds of existence, both external and internal. The deeper teaching here shows us that what we often call silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of natural awareness that can hold all sounds without being overwhelmed by them. The student's struggle represents our common misunderstanding of meditation and mindfulness practice. We often believe the goal is to eliminate thoughts and achieve some kind of mental vacuum, when actually the invitation is to develop a different relationship with our mental activity. Why do we find it so difficult to rest in natural awareness? Zen Buddhism points to several factors that create this struggle. First is our relationship with control. We approach meditation like a project to be completed, a problem to be solved through force and determination. But awareness is more like space than like an object we can grasp or manipulate. The harder we try to capture it, the more elusive it becomes. Second is our misunderstanding of what constitutes distraction. The student believed his thoughts were obstacles to overcome, enemies to defeat. But the abbess's teaching reveals that sounds, whether external like rain or internal like thoughts, are not inherently problematic. The question is not how to eliminate them, but how to relate to them skillfully. Consider your own experience with trying to quiet your mind. How often have you become frustrated with meditation because thoughts kept arising? The rain in this story represents a different approach entirely. Instead of fighting with the activity of consciousness, we can learn to rest in the awareness that naturally holds all experiences. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called choiceless awareness. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but rather a quality of alert receptivity that can accommodate whatever arises without immediately judging it as good or bad, helpful or hindering. Just as the pavilion naturally sheltered the student and abbess while allowing them to hear the rain, awareness naturally provides a spacious container for all our experiences. The Buddha taught, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The student was seeking peace as something to be achieved in the future through the elimination of his current experience. But the abbess showed him that peace was already present, not as the opposite of mental activity, but as the aware space in which mental activity arises and passes away. The rain teaches us about natural rhythm and flow. It doesn't force itself to fall. It doesn't strain to make sound. It simply expresses its nature completely. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise naturally in consciousness. Our suffering comes not from their presence, but from our resistance to their natural flow. Zen teacher Alan Watts spoke of this when he said, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." The student discovered that instead of trying to create silence, he could become aware of the silence that was already listening to both the rain and his thoughts. This listening awareness was not something he needed to manufacture, but something he could recognize and rest in. The story also reveals the power of skillful guidance. The abbess didn't explain anything intellectually or give the student techniques to practice. Instead, she created conditions where natural awareness could reveal itself. Sometimes the most profound teachings come not through words, but through direct experience of what we're seeking to understand. Tonight, as you rest in whatever sounds surround you, whether it's actual rain, traffic, the hum of appliances, or the activity of your own mind, can you experiment with the abbess's approach? Instead of trying to achieve silence, can you notice the awareness that is already listening to all sounds? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between silence and sound, between peace and mental activity, exists more in our concepts than in our direct experience. In recognizing this, we find the peace that was never actually lost. Now, let us turn to a story about the beautiful impermanence that touches all existence. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter Hoshin's last lesson. In a peaceful monastery high in the mountains, where morning mist clung to ancient pine trees, and the sound of temple bells marked the gentle rhythm of contemplative life, lived a Zen master whose very name had become synonymous with wisdom and compassion. Master Hoshin had guided countless students along the path of awakening for more than 40 years, and his presence had become as much a part of the monastery as its weathered stone walls and carefully tended gardens. Now, in the final days of his long and devoted life, Hoshin lay on a simple sleeping mat in his small quarters, surrounded by the disciples who had found in him not just a teacher, but a living embodiment of the Buddha's compassion. The room was filled with a profound stillness that seemed to radiate from the master himself, despite the quiet grief that touched each student's heart. The disciples had gathered close, some sitting in meditation posture, others kneeling beside their teacher's mat. Their faces reflected the deep love and gratitude they felt for this man, who had so generously shared his understanding, who had guided them through their struggles and celebrated their insights, who had been both demanding and infinitely patient in his dedication to their spiritual growth. As the afternoon light filtered through paper screens, casting gentle shadows that danced slowly across the walls, the disciples found themselves confronting the reality they had long known would come, but somehow never felt prepared to face. Their teacher, who had seemed as permanent as the mountains themselves, was preparing to leave them. The impermanence he had taught them about countless times was now manifest in the most intimate and heartbreaking way. One of the senior monks, his voice thick with emotion and tears flowing freely down his weathered cheeks, leaned close to his teacher. "Master," he whispered, "you are leaving us, and our hearts are heavy with sorrow. We know we have been blessed beyond measure to learn from you, to sit with you, to receive your teachings. As you prepare to depart from this world, please, we beg you, share with us your final teaching. What great truth can you offer us now in these last precious moments? What wisdom can help us continue on the path after you are gone?" The other disciples leaned forward eagerly, despite their grief, hoping to receive some final transmission of their teacher's understanding, some last gift of insight that would help them navigate the path ahead without his physical presence to guide them. Hoshin's breathing had grown shallow and labored throughout the day, but at his students' request, he slowly opened his eyes. They were the same eyes that had sparkled with gentle humor during Dharma talks, that had held steady compassion during their moments of doubt and confusion, that had shone with joy when they made breakthrough realizations. Now those eyes looked upon each beloved face with infinite tenderness and a peace that seemed to transcend the approaching moment of death. "All of you," he said, his voice barely audible, each word requiring tremendous effort, "come closer to me." The disciples moved nearer, forming an intimate circle around their teacher. Some placed their hands gently on his blanket. Others simply leaned in, straining to catch every precious word. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls were listening for this final teaching. With tremendous effort, gathering what remained of his strength, Hoshin spoke his last words. His voice carried the gentle authority that had characterized all his teachings, even as it faded to barely more than a whisper. "This world," he said slowly, pausing between phrases to gather breath, "is like a dream in the night. It is like a bubble floating on a stream. It is like a flash of lightning illuminating summer clouds, like the flame of a flickering lamp, like a phantom that appears and vanishes, like a shadow that has no substance." As the final word left his lips, Master Hoshin closed his eyes for the last time and passed away with a serenity so complete it seemed to transform even death itself into a teaching. His face remained peaceful, almost luminous, as if he had simply stepped from one room into another. The disciples sat in the profound silence that followed, and something remarkable occurred. The grief that had felt so overwhelming just moments before was gently dissolved by a wave of calm understanding that seemed to emanate from their teacher's final words and peaceful passing. They began to comprehend that his last lesson was not about loss, but about the exquisite, fleeting beauty of all existence. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. These were the Buddha's own final words, and they echo the profound teaching Hoshin offered his students. Here we discover that the deepest spiritual teachings often concern not what we can grasp and hold, but what we must learn to release with grace and understanding. What is it about impermanence that we find so difficult to accept? Zen Buddhism reveals that our suffering comes not from impermanence itself, but from our resistance to it. We build our sense of security and identity around the illusion that things should remain stable, that the people we love should always be with us, that our circumstances should provide lasting comfort and familiarity. Look deeply at your own relationship with change and loss. How much of your anxiety stems from trying to make permanent what is naturally transient? We grasp at relationships, possessions, experiences, even pleasant states of mind, as if by holding tightly enough, we could freeze them in time. But Master Hoshin's final teaching reminds us that this very grasping creates the suffering we're trying to avoid. The images Hoshin used are drawn from classical Buddhist poetry, but their relevance to modern life is immediate and profound. Consider how accurately they describe our daily experience. Our thoughts arise and pass away like dreams. Our emotions come and go like bubbles on a stream. Our moments of clarity flash briefly like lightning, illuminating our understanding for an instant before giving way to new experiences. Even our most solid seeming structures, our careers, our homes, our physical bodies, are more like shadows than permanent fixtures. They provide temporary form and function, but they too are subject to the universal law of change. This isn't a pessimistic teaching, but a liberating one. When we truly understand impermanence, we stop trying to extract permanent satisfaction from temporary phenomena. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called appreciation without attachment. This allows us to fully enjoy and engage with life while holding our experiences lightly, knowing they will naturally transform. The disciples' grief was transformed not because they stopped loving their teacher, but because they understood that their love was deeper than any particular form it might take. The Buddha taught, just as a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love towards all beings. This boundless love includes accepting the natural cycles of coming and going, birth and death, meeting and parting that characterize all existence. When we fight against these cycles, we create suffering. When we align with them, we find peace. Consider how Hoshin approached his own death. He didn't rage against it or try to avoid it. Instead, he used even this final moment as an opportunity to teach, to offer his students one last gift of wisdom. His peaceful passing became itself a teaching about how to meet impermanence with grace and understanding. This doesn't mean we shouldn't feel sadness when we lose someone dear to us. The disciples' tears were natural and appropriate, but their grief was transformed when they understood that what they truly loved about their teacher, his wisdom, compassion, and presence, couldn't be destroyed by physical death. These qualities had been awakened in them through their relationship with him. Tonight, as you reflect on the people and experiences you cherish most, can you practice holding them with both love and lightness? Can you appreciate their preciousness precisely because they won't last forever? Like morning dew that makes the garden sparkle before evaporating in the sun, perhaps it's the temporary nature of what we love that makes it so beautiful. As the Buddha taught, of all things, the most precious is every moment. Do not let even one pass by without being conscious of its value. In understanding impermanence, we don't lose what we love. We learn to love more fully, knowing that this very moment is our only opportunity to express that love completely. Let us continue on our journey to a story about the nature of emotions and the wisdom of the unborn mind. This is Bankei and the argumentative priest. During the summer teaching season at Master Bankei's temple, seekers would gather from across the countryside to hear his talks on what he called the unborn mind. The temple courtyard would fill with monks in brown robes, lay people in simple clothing, merchants taking respite from their travels, and scholars eager to engage with Bankei's revolutionary approach to Zen teaching. His words had a unique quality of directness and simplicity that could reach anyone, regardless of their level of education or spiritual sophistication. Bankei's teaching style was unlike that of many Zen masters of his time. Rather than relying on cryptic koans or elaborate ceremonies, he spoke in plain language about the natural awareness that exists before thoughts arise, before emotions color our perception, before our minds create the complex narratives that often cause us suffering. He called this pristine awareness the unborn mind, because it was never created and therefore could never be destroyed. On this particular afternoon, the courtyard was filled with an atmosphere of peaceful attention as Bankei spoke about the effortless nature of our original awareness. You don't need to manufacture Buddha nature, he was explaining, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd. It's already present in this very moment of listening. When you hear the sound of my voice, when you see the sunlight filtering through these trees, when you feel the breath entering and leaving your body, that aware presence that knows these experiences is itself Buddha nature. Suddenly, from the middle of the crowd, a priest from another Buddhist sect stood up abruptly. This man was well known in the region for his argumentative nature and his tendency to challenge teachers from traditions other than his own. His face was already flushed with disagreement, and his posture suggested he had come not to learn, but to debate. "Master Bankei," the priest called out in a loud voice that carried across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "You teach that our original mind is the Buddha, and that it is perfect, exactly as it is. But if that were truly the case, then why do I experience anger? Why do I have selfish thoughts and jealous feelings? Why do I sometimes feel hatred or act in ways I later regret? If I was born a Buddha, as you claim, then surely I would never experience such negative emotions. Your teaching is clearly flawed." The crowd stirred with interest at this challenge. Many had wondered about this same question. If our original nature was truly pure and perfect, why did they struggle with difficult emotions and reactive behaviors? Several people turned to look at Bankei, curious to see how he would respond to this pointed criticism. Bankei looked at the priest with eyes that held no trace of defensiveness or irritation. Instead, his expression showed genuine interest and appreciation for the question. He smiled warmly, as if the priest had offered him a wonderful gift. "That is truly an excellent question," Bankei replied with genuine warmth. "Please, come up here beside me so we can explore this together more closely. I think everyone would benefit from examining what you've raised." As the priest began pushing his way through the densely packed crowd to reach the front, people reluctantly shifted to make room for him. Some stepped on others' feet. There was quiet grumbling about the disruption, and several people had to move their cushions and belongings. The priest himself grew increasingly agitated as he navigated through the crowd, bumping into people, having to excuse himself repeatedly, and feeling the eyes of hundreds of people watching his somewhat clumsy progress. Meanwhile, Bankei continued his talk as if nothing unusual was happening. He spoke to the remaining audience about the simple, natural awareness that was present right now, listening to his words. "This awareness that hears my voice," he said gently, "doesn't struggle to understand or figure anything out. It simply receives what is offered. Notice how effortlessly it knows the difference between the sound of my voice and the sound of birds in the trees, between the warmth of sunlight and the coolness of shade." By the time the priest finally reached the front of the gathering, his face was red, not only from exertion, but from mounting frustration. He was breathing heavily, his robes were disheveled, and he felt embarrassed by the awkward spectacle his journey through the crowd had created. The irritation that had begun with his disagreement about Buddhist doctrine had been amplified by the practical difficulties of reaching Bankei. The master paused in his teaching and turned to face the priest with the same warm smile he had offered before. The contrast was striking. Bankei appeared completely calm and centered, while the priest was obviously agitated and uncomfortable. "Ah, you have arrived," Bankei said, with gentle appreciation. "Now then, you were asking about anger and negative emotions. Please, show me this anger you spoke of. Where is it now?" The priest paused, suddenly confused. He looked within himself, expecting to find the burning sense of righteous indignation that had motivated his challenge. But to his surprise, it was no longer there. The heat of argument had cooled during his journey through the crowd, replaced by a simple feeling of being slightly out of breath and somewhat embarrassed. "Well," he said hesitantly, "it's gone now. I am not feeling angry at this particular moment." Bankei's smile deepened, and his eyes sparkled with the delight of someone who has just witnessed a perfect teaching moment unfold naturally. "How very interesting," he said, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "This anger you were so concerned about, it comes and it goes completely on its own, doesn't it? It arrives like an unexpected visitor stopping by your house, and then it departs just as suddenly. But you, the one who experiences the anger coming and going, you remain present throughout." The priest stood silent, beginning to sense that something profound was being revealed, though he couldn't quite grasp it yet. Bankei continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone pointing out something obvious that had somehow been overlooked. "Tell me, when this visitor called anger comes to your house, do you become the anger? Or do you remain the host who is aware of the visitor's presence?" The priest's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came. For the first time in years of debating Buddhist doctrine, he found himself genuinely speechless. A dawning recognition was beginning to emerge in his awareness. "The anger, the jealousy, the selfish thoughts you mentioned," Bankei said gently, "they are like clouds passing through the sky. They come and go according to causes and conditions, but the sky itself remains unchanged. You, the awareness that knows these emotions, are like that sky. You mistake temporary visitors for your true identity. Why do you insist on calling yourself by the names of your guests?" The priest stood in stunned silence for a long moment, and then, for the first time in many years, his argumentative stance simply dissolved. Without a word, he bowed deeply to Bankei, not in ritual formality, but in genuine recognition of a teaching received. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger." This ancient wisdom illuminates the crucial distinction between experiencing emotions and becoming identified with them. Bankei's gentle demonstration reveals how our suffering comes not from the natural arising of feelings, but from our confusion about who we actually are in relationship to those feelings. The deeper teaching here shows us that what we call our emotional problems are actually cases of mistaken identity. We believe we are our anger, our sadness, our anxiety, or our joy, when actually we are the aware space in which all these experiences come and go. This recognition doesn't eliminate emotions, but it transforms our relationship to them completely. Why do we so readily become identified with our emotional states? Zen Buddhism points to the mind's habit of creating a solid sense of self from fluid experiences. From early childhood, we learn to say, "I am angry," rather than "anger is present." "I am sad," rather than "sadness is arising." This subtle linguistic habit reflects a deeper confusion about the nature of identity. Consider your own experience with difficult emotions. How often do you find yourself completely absorbed in anger, believing in those moments that you are an angry person, or lost in anxiety, convinced that worry defines who you are? The priest's experience demonstrates how quickly these seemingly solid emotional states can shift when we simply observe them with awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called emotional transparency. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or detached, but rather developing the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining some perspective on the temporary nature of all feelings. We learn to dance with emotions rather than being danced by them. The Buddha taught, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded." When we identify completely with our emotional states, we become subject to their every fluctuation. When we recognize emotions as temporary visitors in the space of awareness, we maintain our equilibrium even during intense experiences. Bankei's approach was particularly skillful because he didn't argue with the priest's emotions or try to convince him intellectually. Instead, he created conditions where the priest could discover directly that his anger was already absent. This points to a crucial aspect of emotional wisdom. Most of our emotional suffering involves either clinging to pleasant states that are passing away or fighting with unpleasant states that are already changing. The metaphor of emotions as visitors is particularly helpful for modern practitioners. When anger knocks on your door, you don't have to refuse it entry, but you also don't have to redecorate your entire house to accommodate it. You can acknowledge its presence, understand what it might need, and allow it to leave naturally when its visit is complete. This teaching also reveals something important about the argumentative mind itself. The priest's need to debate and challenge came from a deeper insecurity about the nature of reality. When he discovered that his anger was not as solid or permanent as he had believed, his argumentative stance naturally dissolved. Often, our mental conflicts are resolved not through winning debates, but through seeing more clearly. Tonight, as emotions arise in your experience, can you experiment with Bankei's perspective? Instead of immediately identifying with feelings as they emerge, can you notice the aware presence that knows them? Can you be the host rather than mistaking yourself for whatever guest happens to be visiting? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to let go includes releasing our identification with temporary emotional states, discovering the peace that exists not in the absence of emotions, but in understanding our true relationship to them. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about how customs can outlive their purpose. This is the lesson of the monastery cat and the scholars who forgot. In a peaceful monastery nestled in the mountains, a community of monks dedicated themselves to regular meditation practice. Every evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and shadows grew long across the temple grounds, they would gather in the meditation hall for their most important practice session of the day. This was a time of deep silence and inner contemplation that had been maintained for generations. However, the monastery was also home to a particularly vocal cat who had made the temple grounds his territory. This cat had developed the unfortunate habit of appearing during the evening meditation sessions, meowing loudly, knocking over water bowls, and generally creating disturbances that made it difficult for the monks to maintain the focused attention their practice required. Night after night, the monks would attempt to settle into deep meditation, only to be interrupted by the cat's antics. Some tried to ignore the disruptions. Others attempted to gently shoo the animal away, but nothing seemed to work consistently. The cat seemed to have an uncanny ability to choose the most inopportune moments for his loudest and most distracting behavior. Finally, the spiritual teacher who led the community decided that practical action was needed. Rather than allowing the evening practice to continue being disrupted, he instructed his students to gently capture the cat before each meditation session and tie him securely in a corner of the hall where he could do no harm. This simple solution proved effective. The cat, though present, could no longer disturb the monk's concentration. Years passed peacefully with this arrangement. The evening meditation sessions proceeded without interruption. The monks deepened their practice, and the cat seemed content enough with his restrained position during the evening hours. This became the established routine that everyone accepted as normal and necessary. When the old teacher eventually died, the monks naturally continued all the practices he had established, including the evening tying of the cat. After all, this had been part of their master's wisdom, a tradition he had instituted for important spiritual reasons. They didn't question whether the practice was still necessary. It had simply become an integral part of their evening routine. In time, the original cat also died, having lived a full life in the monastery. The monks, now thoroughly convinced that having a tied cat was essential to proper meditation practice, went to great lengths to acquire another cat specifically for this purpose. They searched until they found a suitable replacement and continued the tradition without interruption. Generations of monks came and went, each learning from their predecessors that tying a cat during evening meditation was a crucial element of their spiritual practice. None questioned why this was necessary. It was simply how things had always been done in their tradition. Centuries later, learned descendants of the spiritual teacher wrote scholarly treatises about the religious significance of tying up a cat for meditation practice. They developed elaborate theories about the symbolic meaning of the restrained cat, its representation of taming the wild mind, and its importance in creating the proper spiritual atmosphere for contemplation. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. This tale unveils how easily practical solutions can transform into meaningless rituals when we stop questioning their original purpose. Why do we continue practices long after their usefulness has ended, simply because they've become traditional? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of understanding the spirit behind forms, rather than blindly following inherited customs that may no longer serve their intended function. The original teacher's decision to tie the cat was purely practical, a simple solution to a specific problem. But over time, this practical measure became ritualized, then sacralized, then analyzed as if it contained profound spiritual meaning that had always been intentional. Consider the various traditions, rules, and customs in your own life, both personal and cultural. How many of these practices do you follow simply because that's how it's always been done, rather than because they serve a current purpose? The monastery's cat represents all the meaningless forms we maintain out of habit rather than wisdom. This teaching applies to spiritual practices, workplace procedures, family traditions, and social customs. Over time, solutions to specific problems can become rigid requirements that persist long after the original problems have disappeared. What began as skillful means becomes empty ritual. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself, between the forms that serve awakening and awakening itself. The tied cat was never the point. Peaceful meditation was the point. But succeeding generations lost sight of this distinction. The Buddha said, "My teaching is like a raft. It is for crossing over, not for holding onto." The cat-tying tradition represents what happens when we turn temporary rafts into permanent shrines, mistaking the means for the end. Look deeply at the various practices and traditions you maintain. Which ones still serve their original purpose, and which ones have become empty forms you follow out of habit? What would it mean to honor the spirit of these practices while remaining flexible about their forms? The scholars who wrote treatises about the cat's religious significance weren't intentionally creating false doctrine. They genuinely believed they were preserving important wisdom. But their analysis was built on a foundation they didn't understand, leading to elaborate explanations of something that had never been intended as spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various routines, traditions, and practices in your life, can you remember the original cat and the practical problem it solved? Can you distinguish between forms that still serve their purpose and those that have become meaningless repetition? As the Buddha observed, believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. True spiritual maturity involves continuously examining our practices to ensure they serve their intended purpose, rather than simply preserving forms because they've become familiar. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern?" I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional, In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor, whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass. watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses, or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, 'Pain is certain, suffering is optional.' This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us." What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous, or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory, We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Now, let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Yunmen taught, students came from across China to study with the master, whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "Hi, Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the 6th patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession, not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the 6th patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics, to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. How can you both see and not see? He pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously? The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. What I see, he explained with gentle clarity, are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing. With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories, seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense, imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. How much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly? Or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities? Or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, What if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind? This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts, and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. "I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me." With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. "I forgive you, wherever you are," he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face and he remembered moments of love, the weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. I am the light and the way. I recognized that I was the impediment, not anyone else. At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, "I am someone who was wronged," rather than, "I experienced wronging, but I'm not defined by it." Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, "Forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past." We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private audience with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the realm. The Emperor came with genuine curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal chamber where matters of state were usually discussed, the Emperor felt comfortable posing even the most profound questions to this renowned master. After all, If anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in contemplation and practice. Master Gudo, the emperor began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual attainment would understand such matters. The emperor expected a profound discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death, perhaps insights into rebirth, karma, or the eternal nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle realms, the dissolution of individual consciousness into cosmic unity, or other elevated teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and gave the most honest answer possible. How should I know? The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master revered throughout the land for his wisdom, essentially admitting ignorance about what seemed like a fundamental spiritual question. But master, the emperor pressed, somewhat incredulous, you are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things. Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. Yes, sir, but not a dead one. The simplicity of this exchange contains a profound teaching about the nature of genuine wisdom and the difference between authentic understanding and pretended knowledge. As the Buddha taught, I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound honesty that characterizes true spiritual maturity, the willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge, rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can theorize about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a demonstration of it. He refused to engage in speculation about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any elaborate theory about post-death consciousness could have provided. Consider how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know. Whether it's offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definitive advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes, we often feel pressured to appear knowledgeable rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. We imagine that awakening provides a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we cultivate what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind," a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linchi taught, there is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn. Enlightenment doesn't grant supernatural knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of speculation until one actually dies. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But whatsoever, after due examination and analysis, you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to." Even the Buddha encouraged direct investigation, over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste constructing theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine? Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo displayed? The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in accumulating information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living authentically in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' motivations, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know, discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the Master's honest, "How should I know?" points toward a more genuine relationship with mystery, one that honors what cannot be known, while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier!" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushiga sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master. His anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushiga's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" And so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted," only to discover new stresses. "I'll be content with more money," only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walks slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
"This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real."
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretched toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike. But overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say, 'go with the flow'?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost, even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the travelers' minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. Now, let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, consulting friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers, but nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply dwindling, but his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, After a grueling climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was modest and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had transcended worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and reverence, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise, holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or an aura of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But, more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the radiant presence, the obvious signs of spiritual attainment, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale unveils the profound truth that we find what we're prepared to see, and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people, while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his preconceptions. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The checkout clerk who greets you with genuine warmth, the janitor who works with quiet dignity, the child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you're prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult co-worker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we're ready to learn. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer. Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance, Clearly, this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household.
"Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere."
The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances, a rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols, rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions. Each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles, to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident,
each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions.
The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Puyi, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened," the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men." Yen Puyi absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Puyi cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility, because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of don't know mind as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Yen Pui discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace. The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, He once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. As our time together draws to a peaceful conclusion, take a moment to notice the serenity that has unfolded. Can you perceive that this tranquility isn't an external gift, but an inherent part of you, always accessible? Can you acknowledge that the deep calm you've encountered tonight is not confined to these narratives, but resides within your own mindful presence, patiently waiting to be noticed? The Buddha wisely shared, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." Considering this profound guidance, understand that calm and insight are not reliant on specific conditions or grand achievements. Instead, they flourish from your own engaged attention, available whenever you choose to turn inward. Each narrative we explore tonight has served as a gentle reminder, pointing toward a similar empowering understanding that challenges lessen their hold when we meet them with gentle acceptance, that a sense of liberation blossoms when we let go of rigid expectations, and that genuine tranquility surfaces when we observe our experiences without immediate judgment. Even if your thoughts wander or a sense of restlessness briefly appears, the understanding you've cultivated this evening is now woven into the fabric of your awareness, a resource you can draw upon whenever you need. As you prepare for sleep, reflect on how these timeless insights haven't shown you a far-off destination, but a way to be more fully alive in your current experience. In the quiet that envelops you now, allow yourself to register the subtle shifts in your state of being, the ease in your body, the rhythm of your breath, the quietude in your mind, open and receptive. These explorations are gentle nudges, reminding us that profound understanding isn't confined to ancient scrolls or secluded retreats. It reveals itself in the straightforward act of paying attention to our inner and outer worlds. Tonight, you've connected with this understanding, a clarity that emerges when we simply pause, breathe, and observe. As you transition from this interlude of calm back into the flow of your life, carry with you not just the echoes of these stories, but the tangible sense of balance and clarity they have helped awaken within you. May this settledness accompany you, a steadying presence through all of life's varied landscapes. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.